Matthew 5 verses 5 and 6 says this: "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled." These are the two of the 8 Beatitudes that we're going to be looking at this week. We looked at number 1 and 2 last week, and today we're looking at number 3 and number 4. And numbers 1, 2, 3 and 4 together, some commentators say, are to do with our attitudes to God, and then number 5, 6, 7 and 8 are to do with our attitudes to each other. I'm not sure it quite falls as easily as that, but you might say this is the second 2 of the first half of the 8, of what these sayings of Jesus, the sayings of who is blessed by God, that we call the Beatitudes. So let's have a look at these. We'll take them one at a time in the order in which they're there. That only makes sense. The first of these 2 blessings is: the favour of God is on the meek. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. First, Jesus calls us to be meek. Now that's one of those words that we put on that list of what is Jesus like and how can we be like him. But meek is a difficult word these days, I think mainly because it sounds like weak. And no one wants to be weak, certainly in the world that we live in these days. We are all wanting to be strong and not weak, but meek does not mean weak. Other words that can be used to translate this word that Jesus uses here could be gentle, or humble, or considerate, or courteous. That's a bit of an old-fashioned word, isn't it? You know, when you say of a man, he's a real gentleman, that kind of sums it up. Now, that might sound a bit old-fashioned and a bit sexist, and I don't mean that at all in a sexist way. And of course, being a gentleman excludes women. Saying she's a real lady, that sounds somewhat different. It means something else in the way we use our language. But the idea of someone being a real gentleman, and I certainly apply this to women just as much as men, means someone who respects others, someone who puts others before themselves, someone who acts in a civil and self-controlled way, someone who is thoughtful and generous. It reminds me again of that amazing book. It's a picture book by Charlie Mackesy called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. And if you haven't seen it yet, or read it, or seen the pictures online, you really should. Charlie Mackesy is a Christian, though he doesn't wear his faith very loudly on his sleeve in that book. He's actually the author, the illustrator of the Alpha Course, and he's delivered quite a few of the Alpha Course messages. He comes from that church where the Alpha Course is based. But his book is simply a book about living the human life well. It's a book that reflects the Beatitudes in many ways. And in one of his pictures, one of his famous pictures, the mole and the boy are sitting up on the branch of a tree. Yeah, I don't know how the mole got there either, but you have to take that for granted when you look at the picture. And the mole says to the boy, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And the boy's reply in one word is kind. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the meek in this sense. Blessed are the people who don't throw their weight around even though they are able to. Blessed are those who don't get their own way all the time and don't care too much that they don't get their own way. Blessed are those who don't have to win the argument because they know there's an eternal judgment waiting and an ultimate vindication of those who are in the right. We can rely on God to give people their justice. And we can depend on that justice and not necessarily demanding justice in this world. Blessed are the meek. Psalm 37 is an Old Testament passage that has a lot to say about the vindication of those who trust in God. Let me read some verses from Psalm 37. It ends in verse 11 with this idea about meekness, but the verses leading up to that speak about this characteristic that is in Jesus that needs to be in us. It says this: "Don't fret because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong, for like the grass they will soon wither. Like green plants they will soon die away. Trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and enjoy safe pasture. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord and trust in him, and he will do this. He will make your righteous reward shine like the dawn, your vindication like the noonday sun. Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for him. Don't fret when people succeed in their ways, when they carry out their wicked schemes. Refrain from anger and turn from wrath. Don't fret, it only leads to evil. For those who are evil will be destroyed, but those who hope in the Lord will inherit the land. A little while and the wicked will be no more. Though you look for them, they won't be found. But the meek will inherit the land and enjoy peace and prosperity." Jesus is clearly influenced by that psalm where he says, "The meek will inherit the earth." Jesus calls us to radical meekness. The word meek was also used of a domesticated animal, an animal that was trained to obey the word of command. Meekness is to have every instinct and passion under the control of God. Is that you? Is that us? Are you able to put yourself under the control of God, who will then make you an inheritor of the eternal, of the new earth that is promised to all those who are part of God's eternal kingdom? How are you challenged today to radical, bold meekness? Not weak submission, but a distinctive, bold, intentional meekness, not weakness, but meekness. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Let's move on to the second one before we put these two together. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. The second of these two blessings, the favour of God, is on the person who is hungry and thirsty for the righteousness of God. People in the time of Jesus knew what real hunger was. An ordinary person was never far from the borderline of real hunger, or the thirst of the desert, the thirst of that deer that pants for streams of water. Hunger here is not that sort of, I'm feeling a bit peckish. This is the hunger of the starving, the thirst of the one who will die without a drink. And Jesus says you need to be wanting and needing God's righteousness as a starving person needs food. Jesus says later in the Sermon on the Mount that we shouldn't worry about physical things, but our first priority should be hungering after God's kingdom and God's righteousness. That's what we should seek first. And then other things, and he means food and clothes, will be provided. Seeking first his kingdom and his righteousness. What does righteousness mean? Well, righteousness is a Bible word with three different meanings, and all three are involved here. First of all, hungering after righteousness means wanting to be right with God. The person who, as in that psalm that we sang, Psalm 42, is the deer that pants for streams of water. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Where can I go and meet with God? It says in that psalm. Like a deer thirsty for fresh water, so we want to know God. The way to achieve satisfaction is only through Jesus. Peace of mind and forgiveness is only through Jesus. We are right by God through faith, by his grace, by believing in Jesus and trusting in his righteousness, which becomes ours. In the first sense of righteousness, that righteousness is God's righteousness given to us. We are righteous in him. That's the first meaning of righteousness. But righteousness has another meaning, and that means righteousness in the sense of wanting to live in a way that pleases God, living in a righteous manner, living out the righteousness that God has put in us. To be like Jesus in our right conduct that follows from our right relationship. Hungry and thirsty to live the life given over to Jesus in all our decisions, in all our words and actions. Knowing that we live unrighteously sometimes and turning back to his ways of right living. That's the second meaning. And the third meaning of righteousness means wanting to live in a righteous society, wanting justice for the world around us, seeing unrighteousness in the world around us and wanting to turn it back to righteousness, like those Old Testament prophets who called for righteousness in their nation. So we need to have that prophetic edge of seeing a world free from oppression, where there is integrity in business and justice and fairness for all, where we see righteousness in our politics, where we see righteousness in the dealings of our world internationally and nationally. Jesus says that the person who pleases him wants righteousness in the world and in the nation like a starving feeling inside. All three of those measures of righteousness are involved here, I think. Are we righteous? Are we right with God? Do we have his righteousness making us right with God through Jesus? Are we living in a righteous way ourselves? Do we have the righteousness of God in the way we live? And thirdly, are we hungering for righteousness in the world, justice and peace in the world around us? And this is a measure of the progress of the Christian life. A hungry appetite for spiritual things, a characteristic of the disciple of Jesus and of becoming more like Jesus day by day. We should be hungry for these things. We should come to church, whether that's physically or in these online meetings. We should come to church hungry, not because we miss breakfast, but because we're expecting to meet with our God and learn more of him. We should live our lives hungry for God, hungry for more of him and more of his righteousness. How do we measure up to this? So 2 ways that we can be more like Jesus: in our meekness and in our righteousness, in our desire for a world that lives out the life of Jesus in radical meekness, in our desire for a world that lives out the righteousness of Jesus. How do we measure up? We need to go to God and say, Lord, make me more like this. Make me more like Jesus. Let's pray.